Tom Brady and Gisele Bundchen announcing their divorce is now final, ending 13 years of marriage. What both of them said today and what Brady said this week about finishing out this season.
7 Super Bowl rings, $500 million, a name that will live in football history for as long as the sport exists. Tom Brady built a life that looks, from the outside, like the definition of winning. And yet in December 2025, while the world watched his ex-wife marry another man in a quiet ceremony in Florida, Brady posted something that made millions of people stop scrolling. Not a celebration, not a statement, just a photograph of himself, paired with a song about a person who feels like their own life no longer belongs to them. No caption explained it. No interview clarified it. But for anyone who has followed the story of Tom Brady and Gisele Bundchen since their marriage ended in 2022, the message landed with a weight that needed no explanation. This is the story of how the most decorated quarterback in NFL history lost the one thing all his championships could never replace, and how, 3 years later, he is still quietly working through what it cost him. When Tom Brady and Gisele Bundchen met in December 2006 on a blind date set up by a mutual friend, they seemed, on paper, like an unlikely pairing that somehow made perfect sense. He was already one of the most famous athletes in America, a Super Bowl champion still building his legend in New England. She was the highest-paid model on the planet, a Brazilian-born icon who had walked runways from Paris to Milan and turned her face into one of the most recognizable in the world. They married in 2009, and within a few years they had built what looked, from every angle the public could see, like a fairy tale. 2 children, Benjamin and Vivian, joined the family, along with Brady's older son Jack from a previous relationship. They lived in sprawling homes, first in Boston, later in Tampa. They were regularly named among the most powerful celebrity couples on the planet. But behind the magazine covers and the red carpet appearances, 2 people were quietly building very different versions of what their life together was supposed to look like. Brady's identity, from the time he was a 6th-round draft pick fighting for a roster spot, had been built entirely around football. It was not simply his job. It was the mechanism through which he understood his own worth. Every off-season workout, every hour spent studying film, every year he pushed his body past what most athletes his age could manage, was part of a singular pursuit of greatness that never seemed to have a finish line. Gisele, for her part, had already lived one all-consuming career. She had spent her 20s as one of the most in-demand models alive, flying between continents, missing holidays, living out of suitcases. When she met Brady, she was ready for something different. She wanted a family life that felt present, grounded, and shared. For years, she tried to build that life around a husband whose calendar was dictated by an NFL season that stretched from July training camp through, in Brady's case, championship runs that often ran into February. By Brady's own admission in various interviews over the years, the strain this created inside the marriage became one of the defining tensions of their relationship. He has spoken publicly about receiving pointed, painful feedback from Gisele about how consumed he was by the sport, feedback that forced him to confront just how much of the day-to-day work of raising their children had fallen on her shoulders while he chased one more ring. Gisele, for her part, has said in later interviews that she felt, for long stretches, like she was managing a household and raising children largely on her own, even though her husband was, technically, still living under the same roof. 6 months a year, Brady's schedule during football season left little room for anything else. Early morning workouts, film sessions that ran for hours, road trips that pulled him away for days at a stretch. And when the season finally ended, there was rarely a real off-season. There were training camps to prepare for, sponsorship commitments, business ventures, and the relentless year-round conditioning regimen that had become as much a part of his identity as his throwing arm. Gisele has spoken candidly, particularly in interviews she gave after the marriage ended, about the sacrifices she made across those 13 years. She stepped back from the peak of her modeling career to be present for her children. She relocated her entire life multiple times to follow Brady's football career from Boston to Tampa Bay. She built her own identity around wellness, sustainability, and motherhood, but always with an awareness that her husband's career came with a gravitational pull that reorganized the family's life around it, season after season. For a long time, both of them tried to make that arrangement work. There were, by various accounts over the years, real conversations about balance, real attempts at compromise, real efforts to keep the marriage steady. But the tension between a man who defined himself through competitive greatness and a woman who wanted a life built around presence and partnership never fully resolved. It simply waited for the moment when it would resurface with enough force to change everything. That moment arrived in February 2022. After 22 seasons, 7 Super Bowl championships, and a level of individual dominance no other quarterback in NFL history had matched, Tom Brady announced his retirement from professional football. He was 44 years old, and in his statement, he spoke about wanting to dedicate himself to the things that mattered most outside the game. For Gisele, and for anyone who had watched the toll the sport had taken on their marriage over the years, this felt like the moment the family had been waiting for. She celebrated the announcement publicly, expressing genuine excitement for a new chapter where her husband would finally be present in the way she had hoped for since their earliest years together. That excitement lasted exactly 40 days. On March 13, 2022, Brady stunned the football world by reversing course entirely. He announced he was returning to play, insisting his place was still on the field. The decision, delivered with the same confidence that had defined his entire career, may have made sense to Brady as a competitor, but to the people inside his home, it read very differently. According to multiple people close to the family at the time, Gisele felt blindsided by the reversal, not simply because of what it meant for football season, but because it represented a broken agreement between two partners who had, she believed, made a decision about their future together. Reports from that period described a wife who had grown tired of watching her husband repeatedly choose his career over commitments made to his family, and who no longer had confidence that shared decisions between them would actually hold. The 2022 season that followed became one of the most painful stretches of Brady's professional life, not because of what happened on the field, but because of what was unraveling off it. In August, he took an unusual 11-day leave from training camp, citing personal matters, without further explanation, a decision that fueled speculation about just how serious the situation at home had become. By September, reports emerged that Brady and Gisele were living separately. Multiple outlets described a marriage that had reached a breaking point, with divorce attorneys reportedly already involved. Tom Moore, a longtime NFL assistant coach who worked alongside Brady during that period, later described in his own writing what he witnessed in the Tampa Bay locker room that season. A man who was, by every outward sign, falling apart. Brady, famous for his disciplined physique and unshakable composure, was reportedly losing noticeable weight, appearing gaunt in a way that alarmed people who had known him for years. There were accounts of him sitting alone in the locker room after games, fully dressed in uniform, simply staring ahead for long stretches, without speaking to teammates or coaches passing by. On October 28, 2022, the marriage officially ended, because the couple had a prenuptial agreement and had already reached arrangements regarding their children. The divorce was filed and finalized on the same day, an unusually swift resolution for a split of that magnitude and public interest. Both Brady and Gisele released measured statements emphasizing their commitment to co-parenting their children. Brady described the process as painful. Neither offered much detail about what had actually driven them apart. That clarity would not come until months later, when Gisele decided to speak for herself. In March 2023, Gisele sat down for a cover interview with Vanity Fair, her first extended conversation since the divorce became final. She used the opportunity to correct what she considered the most damaging rumor circulating about the split, the idea that she had issued Brady an ultimatum, forcing him to choose between football and his marriage. She called that narrative deeply hurtful and untrue. The truth, she explained, was more complicated and, in some ways, sadder. She and Brady had met as two people in their 20s who wanted the same things at the time. Over more than a decade together, those priorities had quietly diverged until the two of them, in her words, were no longer working toward a shared vision of what their life should look like. It was not one dramatic betrayal that ended the marriage. It was years of accumulated distance. In a separate, emotional conversation with journalist Robin Roberts, Gisele described the end of her marriage as the death of a dream, a phrase that captured something raw than the usual public statements celebrities give about their divorces. She had to pause and compose herself before continuing. This was not the language of someone who walked away without feeling the loss. It was the language of someone mourning a future she had once believed in completely, built around a partnership that, in the end, could not hold together the way she had hoped. She had supported Brady through 7 championship runs. She had rearranged her career and her geography around his. And in the end, she made the decision to leave not because the love had disappeared, but because she had reached a point where staying no longer felt sustainable for her own well-being. Despite the pain of the split, Gisele has been notably gracious in how she has spoken about Brady publicly in the years since. She has said she wants nothing but happiness for him and for his dreams to come true, a sentiment she has repeated across multiple interviews, rather than offering the kind of bitterness that often follows high-profile divorces. That grace would matter, because Gisele was already, quietly, building the next chapter of her life, one that would eventually stand in sharp and public contrast to the marriage she had left behind. Not long after the divorce became public, Gisele grew closer to Joaquim Valente, a Brazilian jiu-jitsu instructor who had originally come into the family's orbit as a teacher for her children. The two were first spotted together in late 2022, and by 2023 their relationship had evolved from friendship into something more. Unlike her marriage to one of the most famous athletes on the planet, Gisele's relationship with Valente unfolded almost entirely outside the spotlight. He was not a celebrity in his own right. Their life together, by every account, was built around routine, privacy, and a kind of steadiness that stood in deliberate contrast to the demands of Brady's career. In February 2025, Gisele and Valente welcomed their first child together, a baby boy, marking a new family chapter that extended well beyond her years with Brady. Then, in December 2025, marriage records confirmed that the couple had quietly married on December 3rd in a small, private ceremony at their home in Surfside, Florida, attended only by close friends and family. There was no public announcement, no red carpet, no press release. The news only became public weeks later, when Gisele appeared at a public event in Sao Paulo, wearing a wedding band, prompting reporters to confirm what marriage records had already shown. It was, in almost every visible way, the opposite of the public, high-profile life she had lived during her marriage to Brady. Quiet, private, and centered entirely around family rather than fame. For Brady, the timing of the news arrived at an interesting moment in his own life. He had transitioned fully into a broadcasting career, working as the lead NFL analyst for Fox Sports, and had been linked romantically, on and off, to other women in the years since his divorce, though none of those relationships had become permanent in the way his marriage to Gisele once was. When the news of her wedding broke publicly in December 2025, Brady was, by outward appearances, moving forward with his own life. But what he posted in the days that followed suggested that moving forward and fully letting go are not always the same thing. 2 days after news of Gisele's wedding became public, Brady posted a pair of photos to his Instagram story. In one, he wore a hooded sweatshirt with the words "Forever Young" across the chest, captioned with a single word of affirmation. On the surface, it looked like nothing unusual, the kind of low-key personal post athletes share all the time. What caught people's attention was the music he chose to accompany it. Logic's widely known 2017 song built around the phone number for the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, a song whose lyrics describe someone struggling with the feeling that their own life no longer feels like it belongs to them. The choice sparked immediate conversation online, with many fans wondering aloud whether Brady was using the song to express something about his own state of mind following the news of his ex-wife's marriage. To be clear, Brady has never confirmed publicly that the post was intended as any kind of personal statement, and it would be irresponsible to claim to know exactly what he meant by it. What can be said is that the timing, coming so soon after the wedding news broke, and the specific choice of a song built entirely around themes of emotional struggle, was enough to make even casual observers pause. It is a reminder that mental health struggles can touch anyone, regardless of how much success or wealth they have achieved. And if this story resonates with you or someone you know, support is available by calling or texting 988, the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, at any time. If the Instagram post revealed something about where Brady's mind might have been in late 2025, an earlier moment in his post-retirement life revealed something even more direct about the personal cost of some of his choices. In 2024, Brady agreed to headline a Netflix comedy roast, a format built entirely around public figures sitting through an evening of jokes at their own expense. Brady, who has always described himself as someone who enjoys laughing at himself and thrives around competitive ribbing, seemed like a natural fit for the format. The special drew enormous viewership numbers and plenty of headlines. What Brady did not fully anticipate was how the jokes aimed not at him, but at his family, at his divorce, and at Gisele's new relationship would land with his own children. In interviews given roughly a year after the special aired, Brady opened up about the fallout in unusually candid terms. He described the night of the actual filming as electric, a moment he said he would never forget. But he also said that speaking with his children the following day felt, in his words, like a stake through the heart. His kids, he explained, were protective of both of their parents, and they asked him directly why he had allowed jokes about their family to become public entertainment. Brady has since said there are things a parent gets wrong without realizing it until later, and that watching his children's hurt reaction taught him a lesson about presence and protection that no amount of football success ever could. That admission matters, because it reflects something larger about the arc of Brady's life since his divorce. For 2 decades, his sense of identity and worth was built almost entirely around performance on the football field, where mistakes could be corrected with more preparation and more discipline. Parenting and marriage do not offer that same kind of do-over. The roast, and his children's reaction to it, appears to have forced Brady to sit with a version of failure that no amount of championship rings could undo. Across multiple interviews since his divorce, a consistent theme has emerged in how Brady talks about that period of his life. He has openly acknowledged, in his own words, that he has not been a perfect parent, and that there is no manual that fully prepares anyone for the job. He has talked about learning, later in life, that real parenting happens not in the big, dramatic moments, but in the quiet, consistent ones. Being present, being available, showing up in the small daily interactions that build trust over time. These are not the words of a man in denial about what happened in his marriage. They are the words of someone who has had years now to sit with the consequences of choices that once felt, in the moment, like they had no downside. At the same time, Brady has never fully disowned the choices that built his football legacy. He has spoken about believing, at least in part, that showing his children what total commitment and discipline look like was its own form of parenting, a lesson in what it takes to be great at something. Whether that belief and the regret he has expressed about his children's pain from the roast, or about the toll the marriage took, can fully coexist is something even Brady himself seems to still be working out. What is clear is that the confident, unshakable public figure who once seemed immune to doubt has, in his late 40s, become noticeably more willing to admit that greatness on the field and presence at home do not always arrive as a package deal. Sometimes, choosing one comes at the direct expense of the other, and no amount of championships can fully soften that trade once it has been made. Today, the contrast between Brady's life and Gisele's could hardly be sharper. Gisele has built exactly the kind of quiet, family-centered existence she once described wanting during her marriage. A low-profile husband, a new baby, and a private life largely shielded from the tabloid attention that once followed her every move. She has spoken about this new chapter in terms of peace and presence, values that, by her own account, were often missing during her years with Brady. She has also continued, publicly and repeatedly, to wish him well, a grace that speaks to how she has chosen to close that chapter of her life. Brady, meanwhile, remains one of the most recognizable and successful figures in American sports history, a 7-time champion whose name will be attached to NFL records for generations. But his own words, given across interviews since his divorce, suggest a man who is still working through what that success actually cost him. He has admitted to failures as a parent. He has admitted to regret over choices that hurt the people closest to him. And in December 2025, whether intentionally or not, he shared a message that resonated with millions of people who understood, on some level, what it feels like to watch someone you once built a life with move fully into a new one without you. Tom Brady chased greatness for 22 seasons, and he found it repeatedly, in ways almost no other athlete in history has matched. But greatness on the football field, it turns out, was never going to be enough to hold together everything he wanted at once. At 48, with 7 rings, a broadcasting career, and a legacy that will never be questioned, Brady appears to have finally arrived at an honest reckoning with the one part of his life that football could never fix. What do you think really drove Tom Brady and Gisele Bundchen apart? Let us know in the comments. And if you found this story meaningful, don't forget to like and subscribe for more.